This is my endgame PC. Everything in this build was chosen so I wouldn't need to upgrade for a long time. But getting here wasn't as straightforward as I expected because, believe it or not, this smaller GPU somehow made this build a little harder than I thought. I got lucky with the RAM situation and a cooling problem I didn't see coming. But I am getting ahead of myself. The excitement for this build actually started when I saw the RTX 5090 for the first time. Seeing that it's a dual slot card, I knew immediately that it would fit in my Form T1, especially because I previously had the RTX 4090 Founders Edition in there. So a smaller, more powerful card in the same case, that's exactly what I wanted. But actually getting one took months. Newegg prices were crazy, Micro Center was sold out for weeks. At some point, I was beginning to give up on the idea of a 5090 build altogether. Then I randomly checked Amazon one day in July last year, and there it was. But when it arrived, I didn't start building right away. Since swapping the GPU in this case meant tearing down the entire build, I wanted every piece of this build to be right, including the Form T1 travel kit for the RTX 5090 because that will hold it perfectly in place. I also felt that it might be a good opportunity to upgrade my CPU and RAM as well. Honestly, I really wanted this build to film and perform like a tank. So once everything arrived, I was just way too excited to start building the whole thing. Starting with the easiest part of the entire build, the motherboard. This is the Asus ROG Strix X870i. For a mini ITX board, it packs a lot. Massive heat sinks, two M.2 slots stacked on top of each other, which is exactly what I needed considering that I've been using my PC to learn 3D design and also for more intensive video rendering that my M1 Max MacBook Pro really struggles with, especially because now it's really beginning to show its age. So I'm running 6 terabytes of storage in this build, a 4 terabyte and a 2 terabyte Samsung 990 Pro SSD. One thing I didn't expect to like is this thing. This is the Asus ROG Hive 2. It's a small audio interface that comes with this exact motherboard. Now, it's not going to replace your dedicated audio interface, but the fact that Asus includes one of this in this motherboard is pretty unique. That's like saving you an extra $120 that you'd spend on a separate one. I honestly thought it was a gimmick when I saw it at first, but I've been using it way more than I thought I would, especially for testing new monitors, peripherals, and PC builds. Next is the CPU. This is the 9800X3D. It is the best gaming chip on the market right now, which also handles my creative workloads really well too. Premiere, Audition, Fusion, all of them sometimes open at the same time. Something I've been doing with my personal builds is swapping the stock AM5 brackets for this AM5 contact frame from Thermal Grizzly. I started doing this because it helps me not to over tighten the CPU cooler, which could add a lot of pressure to the CPU and the socket pins as well. Now, the RAM. And this is where I got really lucky. You see, I wanted this build to be overkill, not just for gaming, but for the way that I use my PC. Multiple heavy apps open at once, learning new tools like Fusion 360, and honestly, I low-key wanted to be ready for GTA 6 whenever it arrives. So when I saw this Corsair 96GB stick for around $300 at the time, I thought, why not just go all the way? You see, if I hadn't made that decision at the exact moment that I did, things would have been totally different. A couple of days after, I started reading about RAM prices spiking. I got curious, went to check Amazon, and that same kit was now over $1,000. I may have just bought the last unit at that price, which was wild. Anyways, the cooler I went with is the Thermalright X47 Full Copper. It is a 47mm low profile air cooler, and I chose this over liquid cooling for a reason. I had used a 240mm AIO in this case about 2 years ago, but I sometimes travel with this PC because it literally fits in a backpack. So I figured air cooling keeps things simple and a little less risky. Now, I wanted to try something. The Thermalright cooler comes with a 92mm fan, but I wanted to try mounting a 120mm fan on top to see if that improved the cooling in any way. But the cooler wasn't designed for this, so I 3D printed a clip and then made sure that that would sit on top of the heatsink and just above my RAM sticks. And it worked. Alright, so the components are on the board. Now, the real challenge is getting everything into the case. This is the Form T1, and I've been building in this case for a while now. It's portable and I just love the aesthetic. It looks like something that would fit right into an Apple lineup, especially in this silver colorway. Before the GPU goes into the case, I'm using the Form T1 travel kit that contains the replacement I/O brackets for the RTX 5090 Founders Edition, the riser lock bar, which helps to keep the riser cable properly connected to the motherboard, and this anti-sag bracket. Starting with the riser bar, using this 40mm standoff needed to place the GPU in the 3-slot configuration, and then also adding a 20mm standoff here as well. I really love how this GPU I/O brackets feel, because as much as I didn't want to change anything about the graphics card, these brackets feel really premium and high quality, and they also fit the aesthetic of the FOM T1 case as well as the GPU. I removed the stock rear I/O plates and then these tiny screws on the other end of the GPU. It's fantastic that the anti-sag attachment has these tiny slots to store the original screws, because if these weren't here, I would have probably lost them. Then we can attach the RTX 5090 to the I/O plate just like this. And finally, the anti-sag bracket to the GPU mount. This is one of the reasons I waited before starting this build. I wanted these accessories because they hold the 5090 perfectly in place. And that's one less thing to worry about when I'm carrying this PC around. Here's where the dual slot design really pays off. With the 4090, it was a really snug fit because of the size of the GPU, but with the 5090, this gives us a little more space, and that matters because of how air pushes through this card. I've created as much space as I can between the GPU and the motherboard area so that the exhaust fans that we'll install at the top will actually be able to pull all the hot air out. Then we can attach the riser cable to the riser bar and also install that into the case. The standoffs on the riser bar control how much space sits between the GPU and the motherboard. Just be mindful of how much space you leave between them because, well, there is a trade-off. The more gap you leave on the GPU side will also shorten the amount of space that you have for the CPU cooler. So the less gap, the taller your CPU cooler, the more gap, the less or the shorter your CPU cooler. It's sort of a balancing act at this point. Then the motherboard goes in for a quick test, and this is where I noticed a problem. I realized that the 120mm fans can actually fit, but only if it's offset by a little bit so that the fans can sit a little lower. After doing a bit of digging, turns out that there are offset brackets by Dinky that would help to lower the CPU fan, but I don't have them, so back to the stock fans for now. It's a little disappointing, but I'd rather finish the build at this point. Then I mounted the PCU bracket onto the frame. Then the Corsair SF 1000 watts goes in. So far, everything is looking good. One more thing before we close up this build. I 3D printed these exhaust shrouds using PETCF filament, which is mainly carbon fiber reinforced PET. It is heat resistant and will not melt with high temperature, unlike PLA. I've been using this exhaust shroud in my FOM T1 build for a couple of years now. Shout out to AGA for this design. They sit under the Fantex T30 fans at the top and helps pull air out through the top of the case. The fins target the CPU heatsink area and the PSU, so the hottest spots actually get some attention as well. The build is complete and this looks so satisfying. Honestly, every time I build in the FOM T1, I'm reminded why I'm such a huge fan of this case. It's just the sheer density of the build, the premium look and feel, and aside from the tiny footprint, it's just really high quality. Now I'm done gushing over this PC, it's time to turn it on and actually see what the thermals look like. This is where things get uncomfortable. I booted Marvel Rivals and the CPU was running really hot. I also tried booting up Black Myth Wukong just to be sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, and it was pretty much the same thing. Now, remember what I said at the beginning when I said that the smaller GPU somehow made this build a little harder? Well, this is what I meant. The RTX 5090 is a smaller card compared to the 4090, but it still pushes some serious heat, while the 9800 X3D also runs really hot as well. To make things work perfectly, I needed to undervolt both the CPU and the GPU. Undervolting is when you reduce the voltage supplied to a component but without lowering the clock core speed. So in this case, I'm lowering the voltage supplied to both the CPU and the GPU so that they can generate less heat, consume less power, and maybe even run a little quieter. One thing I think is important to note, especially if you intend to build something similar, is the motherboard that you choose. I noticed some motherboards like the one that I have in this build, the Asus X870i, pushes a lot of voltage to the 9800 X3D, which made it run hotter compared to my previous motherboard, the Asus B650. So that's just something for you to note, especially if you're building a small form factor PC like this. After a bit of research, turns out almost everyone with a similar build recommends undervolting the GPU. And I know that that sounds a little weird because the whole point of using an RTX 5090 is just the raw power that you have access to, but I didn't really notice any performance drop after undervolting. I also undervolted the Ryzen 9800 X3D and applied a thermal throttle just to help manage the CPU temps a little bit, and just because I wasn't comfortable with my CPU hitting 95 degrees Cs. Now, this isn't a hardcore benchmarking channel, but I really wanted to show you how much of a difference safely undervolting your CPU especially improved things. These were the results of the tests before I undervolted, and then the results after. I'll also leave links to videos specifically on safely undervolting this CPU because it is definitely worth it. I know I went overboard with this PC build, but I meant it when I said I wanted to build my endgame PC, something powerful enough for both gaming and some of my more intense creative workloads that my MacBook struggles with. And I couldn't be happier with this one.